I'm delighted to be able to talk with you this afternoon about the collection of Steuben glass at the Stark Museum of Art in our, as Jennifer said, 2 exhibitions, the United States in crystal and Steuben glass stories engraved in crystal. One of the key pieces in our collection is this gorgeous vase, which was designed artistically by Tom Lee, and the glass was designed by Lloyd Atkins, one of the Steuben permanent designers. And it gives us a look into the beauty of Steuben glass. This afternoon, we'll explore a little bit about the history of the company and why its history is illuminating for us. Also, a little about the people and the artists involved in Steuben glass and some of the stories that come through the glass. We won't have the total look at Steuben because we're going to concentrate on our own collection here under the Stark Foundation auspices in the museum, as well as the W.H. Stark House. But I think that we have a broad range of works and some instructive stories through this particular collections. The story of Steuben glass begins with one very strong individual, a man named Frederick Carter, who is English and was trained as a glass blower and in England. He visited the United States to study aspects here, and it led to his immigration to the United States, where in upstate New York, he and another glassmaker founded the Steuben Glass Company. And he named the company after the county where they located in mid-central New York, in Corning, New York, adjacent to another glass company, one not producing decorative arts as Carter and his partner intended, but one that was making glass for practical purposes. Eventually, the Corning Glass Company would be known for everything from light bulbs to optical equipment and dinnerware, such as Pyrex that many of us grew up with. Their stories will be intertwined, but originally Steuben was an independent company. And under the leadership of Carter, it specialized in colored glass, which actually was a break from what was popular previously, the clear glass, cut glass, like you will see in the W.H. Stark House special exhibition, Brilliant, which emphasizes brilliant cut glass. But Carter and other glass designers of the very early 20th century began exploring the beauty of color in glass, and he developed a particular type of shiny gold glass that he called aurene, A-U-R-E-N-E, combining the Latin prefix for gold and a Middle Eastern word for a Middle European word for shine. And you can, as you can see in the perfume bottle on the right, the luster of the glass, to which then he applied decoration. And this aurene glass that Carter developed was a competitor to Tiffany glass at the time, and was a very successful line. In the W.H. Stark House, you will see the vase on the left, which is in the library on the mantle, and is another example of the aurene glass. And then on the right is an example of Steuben cased glass. There are 2 layers of glass, the alabaster whitish glass, which is overlaid with a layer of green jade colored glass, and the design is etched through the green to reveal the white. This was another very popular line of Steuben glass in its early days under the leadership of Carter. So you can see that there were a variety of approaches to the glass, and then we'll have one and final example of this early Steuben. On the left, one of the iced tea glasses from a large set of tableware. And you see on the right how it's used. And we invite you and encourage you to visit the W.H. Stark House during the holiday period, where you can see the Pomona glass on display as part of the holiday settings. So this was very popular during the 20s, but Steuben had encountered difficulties during the First World War period, World War I, when production was reduced because of the need for concentration on war supplies. And it was at that time that Steuben glass was acquired by Corning Glass, and it became a separate division, and Carter remained in charge of artistic production. But it was encompassed under the larger company. And it continued its popularity in the 20s, but by the 1930s, and when the Depression had set in, the popularity of Steuben colored glass had decreased. Marketing had become difficult and was dispersed over a variety of sources, and profitability became very much in question. And Corning Glass was faced with a decision about what to do about Steuben glass, because it was not holding its own within the corporate structure. And the Corning Glass practical company had been founded by the Houghton family, and members of the family were still very much involved with the production and management of Corning Glass. And one of the young members of the family, Arthur Houghton Jr., was on the board in his, he was only in his 20s at that point. He was a Harvard graduate. He was a lover of books and was a rare book collector, and was an art collector as well. And Houghton, with all the bravado of youth, decided to volunteer to take on Steuben glass. And with the blessings of the company and with the innovations that Corning Glasswork was able to bring in, he took the company in a totally new direction. Instead of the colored glass, Houghton promoted a complete change to the use of a clear, pure crystal glass. Corning had, in its experimentation in looking for glass formulations that they could use for their practical purposes, had come up with a very clear crystal that totally reflected light, so that the colors were not absorbed, but were reflected back, which gave a real purity of the color, in which you can see in the example on the left of the small mouses that are solid crystal. And Houghton saw that this would be a new type of glass that would respond to a more modern aesthetic. He was perceiving competition from European glass makers, and they continued to keep Carter on as an advisor, but he brought in a totally new staff and structured the company differently. Instead of having one designer who oversaw glass makers, he brought in a total design team with with architectural and artistic backgrounds to work to bring new aesthetics into the design of the glass. And he set up a totally new marketing structure that emphasized exclusivity and luxury and status. And in that way, he promoted works in a totally new way. Houghton brought in John Gates, an architect, to lead the design division, and then Gates hired an artist, and the design director became a sculptor named Sidney Waugh. And on the left, you see another portrait and photographs of the young Sidney Waugh in his studio. And you can see he's got a rather dapper young man with his sculpture in the background. You get a little sense of his artistic style. Waugh grew up in Massachusetts. He studied actually at MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, but wanting to be a sculptor, he traveled to Europe where he apprenticed, and later won the Prix de Rome. And he returned to the US and began a sculptural career doing a monumental sculpture as well as architectural sculpture. And he was hired in the 1930s when Houghton came on to work at Steuben as an artistic director, but he also continued his independent sculptural career. And throughout his life, he balanced his own work with that for Steuben. On the right is an example of one of his sculptures, Justinian, which is one of four sculptures of lawgivers for the U.S. courthouse in Washington, D.C. And it's a bit later in his career. It's a 1951 sculpture, but one of the reasons I chose it is that it's a very good example of his style. You can see very monumental approach in general, large, massive figures. They're realistic, and yet there is a stylization to them. The figures are massive and bulky. They are often stylized in their posture. As we see in this case, the Justinian becomes almost a total column. One of the descriptors for Waugh's style is the style of Art Deco, in that the figures become somewhat more decorative, although they're realistic. And this was a characteristic that he maintained throughout his style. And you can see his approach in the Steuben works as well. On the left is one of the early works that he designed for Steuben. It's one of a series, and you'll see the other pieces later. This is the American Ballad Urn, the Indian figure, and you can see the monumentality of the figure on the left and how it does seem like in its pose and its demeanor, like the Justinian on the right. The American Ballad series was a group of this iteration of it was a group of four figures, each one seemingly an era in American history: the Indian, the trapper, the pioneer, and the cowboy. We have the detail of the cowboy on the left. And the figures are the glasswork is described as urns, but they're also described in the Steuben literature as cigarette jars. They're quite small, only about 4 inches tall, and you might have one of these on your coffee table to offer cigarettes to your guest, and that might be a very elegant approach in the 1940s. Not so much today. So today they would be totally decorative objects. Waugh began his designs for these urns in the 1940s, but the production was interrupted because of World War II. And Waugh went into the Army, as did many of the artists and the managers associated with Steuben glass, Arthur Houghton and others. So it was really in the post-war period that they were able to reinvigorate their new designs for Steuben glass. And Waugh began a project for a series of Steuben plates, simple design object of a clear crystal plate, which featured design elements based on prints by John James Audubon. And Waugh conceived a series of 12 that had some of the most dramatic of the Audubon birds, such as the swallowtail kite or hawk, as it was titled in Audubon's print that you see on the right. And Waugh designed the elements that were taken from the prints, and then Steuben had developed a cadre of artisans who did the actual engraving into the plate. And on the left, you see a photograph of one of the engravers working very carefully with the engraving wheels to cut into the surface of the glass. And right by him is one of the reproductions. This is a modern reprint of John James Audubon's works, which is probably what Waugh originally used for his inspiration, rather than the original prints, such as you will see at the Stark Museum. But since he was mainly getting the outlines for the figures, he could work very closely that way, and possibly the engraver continued to use those as inspiration. One of the interesting aspects about the engraving into the glass, which I think you can see in the plate with the owl on your right, is that the engraving cuts into the surface of the glass. So it's actually a depression in the glass, but it's an optical illusion when you look at it that makes it appear as a relief. So the feathers, the owl's head and eyes look as if they are on the surface of the plate, but they're not. They're actually cut into the glass. Another aspect of the Steuben revolution that Houghton and his staff brought about was also a revolution in marketing. They, instead of having Steuben glass sold by any number of outlets or sold by individual salesmen, as it often had been done, the Steuben curtailed the selling of their products, and they established a flagship store on Fifth Avenue in New York City as their main marketing outlet. So you had to go to New York to buy Steuben, and it was presented quite dramatically as an art gallery there. And then they had a few other very high-end outlets where they would sell the glass. And one of those was Neiman Marcus department store in Dallas, Texas. And that's where H.J. Lutcher Stark originally encountered Steuben glass, we believe. And he was, of course, attracted to the Audubon plates because of his own collection of Audubon materials. And that seems to be his first purchase of Steuben glass, which then led to the major collection that we have today. So Fletcher Stark bought the first 12 plates that Steuben produced, and the company had then subsequently, in the post-war period, done 6 more plates for a total of 18. And Fletcher Stark liked that, but it was not nearly enough for him. And he individually commissioned 18 additional plates. And he presented them with a list of birds that he wanted, one of which was the roseate spoonbill on the left, one of a favorite bird in this region for its beauty and its also quirky appearance. And the Steuben company did a beautiful job with that work as well. The craftsmanship on the Audubon plates is just amazing, and I hope you will come and see the 3 that we have on view now, including the roseate spoonbill, because the detail is just extraordinary. Unfortunately, Stark got a letter back, or got communication back from Steuben that they were not technically able to do 2 of the birds that he had on his list, the ruby-crowned kinglet and the ruby-throated hummingbird. And Stark received a letter from the representative at Neiman Marcus telling him this, and we don't have his answer, but we do know that he didn't take no for an answer from Steuben, and must have insisted that they go ahead and do the ruby-crowned kinglet and the ruby-throated hummingbird. 2 smaller birds, and I think that may have been one of the reasons that Steuben was reluctant to take on those 2 birds. As you see on the right with the ruby-crowned kinglet, it is not as dramatic as the larger birds, and doesn't have the detailing. I think it may have not been as an inspired choice for them, but they did go through. And I wonder if he insisted on those 2 birds with Ruby in the name in memory of his second wife, Ruby Childers Stark, who had passed away. And I hope that was as well a tribute to her memory. The other major project that Sidney Waugh did was a project that Arthur Houghton also championed. It became known eventually as the United States in Crystal, although in the early days, the company discussed it as the Americana series. Houghton envisioned a series of urns, one for each of the 48 at that time states of the United States, and each one would have something of the history of that state. And Sidney Waugh was to be the artist to take on the project, but they felt that they needed outside help in choosing the 50 scenes, because it would have political implications, as well as being a challenge for non-historians. So Houghton approached the Institute of Early American History and Culture, which is an independent research organization in Williamsburg, Virginia. It is supported by the College of William and Mary and other donors, and it still is in existence today. But it was a research organization that promoted scholarship and scholars in American history. And it was a good choice as a historical institution. The director of the Institute was at first a little reluctant to take on the task of coming up with a design for each of the 50 states. And one of the reasons was that he came back and said that, in essence, that some states are just overwhelming with history, and others have no important incidents at all. And he said, for example, they had among themselves and with some of their scholarly contacts tried to come up with a subject for Iowa, and they just were not able to come up with anything. But somehow Houghton insisted, and the Institute did take on the project, and the details of their collaboration, and anything you do by committee, which is in essence this was, takes a great deal of collaboration, and there are pitfalls along the way. But they did make the agreement to and took on the task. And actually a young woman who was a staffer in the office, and she had her master, or she had just earned her master's degree in history, took on the primary task of researching subjects for possible use by Sidney Waugh in designing each of the state bowls. And she would generally produce about from what I understand, 3 or 4 designs for him to choose from. The research on the collaboration between the Institute and Steuben has been done by 2 authors, Joan and Jim Wren, and they did a wonderful job of looking through the records of the Institute, finding and doing interviews to find out some of the points of agreement and disagreement, and historical research between the 2 organizations. For example, one of the early suggestions for a subject for the series was a design for the State Bowl of Utah. And it looks like the suggestion came from the Institute to use a moment in Utah history during the Mormon settlements in 1848, when the state had been plagued by a plague of locust. And then miraculously, gulls appeared that devoured the locust, thus saving the crops of the Mormon settlers. And this has been a mythic, and in the highest form of myth, because it does seem to be based on a real incident in the history of Utah. And Waugh was attracted to the idea because he felt he could do a beautiful design with the birds, and then the delightful figure of the locust as it's chomping on vegetable matter below. For the state, for one of the early bowls, the state of Kentucky, it seems that Steuben reached out and independently sought additional help from historical societies in Kentucky, because the original discussion for a scene for Kentucky was Davy Crockett, and they felt that might look like too much like some of the other state trappers, and they, from their polling of Kentuckians, the subject of racehorses and bourbon whiskey came up as 2 of the most characteristic aspects of Kentucky. So instead of an historical event, they looked more to aspects of the culture. And I think that was those kinds of decisions, not just emphasizing battles and political histories and great men as some of the elements portrayed, but looking more into what makes the state unique, works so successfully for the Bowl of Kentucky. Along the edge of the bowl, they used a frieze of horses and riders, which really emphasizes the shape of the bowl. And then the state name of Kentucky is put in a script and a design that looks like a whiskey label. And so those two elements are brought together in the bowl of Kentucky. From the records, it seems like some of the states were designed independently by Steuben, Virginia, Montana, California, and Texas. There are not a lot of notes on, and all of those four have elements that are so well known that they almost stand out without having to think. For Virginia, the design features the first president, George Washington, in front of his iconic home, Mount Vernon, and with the inscription, "First in war, first in peace." And for Texas, the scene, an iconic scene in Texas history, "Remember the Alamo." And for each of the bowls, after the production was done, Sidney Waugh presented a text that accompanied the bowls. It seems that Steuben had originally intended to do a full publication on the United States in crystal. Unfortunately, that never came to pass. They also intended to make several sets of the United States in crystal. They had promoted the idea that one set would be given to the White House and another set would be given to the National Gallery of Art. And those aspects never came to bear. Instead, only one full set of the United States in crystal was ever produced. And that, of course, was purchased by H.J. Lutcher Stark, planned for his future museum that became the Stark Museum of Art. However, individual bowls were produced, and for the Bowl of Texas, there are as many as 12 or 13 over the history that were made, but some of the bowls, there is only one bowl that was ever produced for that state. I think there are about 19. The set at the Stark Museum will be the only ever complete set of all of the what became 50 bowls, and with the addition of 2 new states. In the text accompanying the bowl for Texas, Waugh wrote that the underlying causes of the great struggle for Texas independence are too complex to be considered here. And that's certainly true today as we re-examine the mythology that's grown up around the Battle of Remember the Alamo. But always this will be a part of that great story of the founding of the state of Texas. Many of the suggestions of Stella Duff Neiman, because she got married and had a child in the midst of all this project, so that's one of the reasons that it stretched out really over 10 years. That and Steuben's production. But for the state of New Hampshire, the suggestion was Daniel Webster, who was one of the most famous of New Hampshire citizens. He was a lawyer and a politician. He served in the Congress and in the Senate. He was known for his incredible oratory, and he was so well known that he became the subject of a fictional short story by Stephen Vincent Benet Daniel Webster and the devil. And in his story, Manet tells of Daniel Webster being a lawyer for a young New Hampshire farmer named Jabez Stone. Stone, being poor and wanting to marry, sold his soul to the devil. And when he did prosper, but when the devil came to claim his soul, Jabez Stone got Daniel Webster to argue his case, and the devil agreed to go before a jury of Americans. And in the story, Daniel Webster was so eloquent that he convinced a jury of American reprobates, and presided over by a justice who had been over the Salem witch trials. He convinced them all that Jabez Stone deserved freedom, even though he'd made this contract, and the devil was bested. The director of the Institute of Early American History and Culture was delighted with the design that Waugh came up with based on Duff's recommendation for Daniel Webster in the court with the devil. The director was also a native of New Hampshire, and he said, we grew up hearing about Daniel Webster in all of our courses in schools, except maybe chemistry, and I know this will be a popular subject. Waugh, on the other hand, disregarded some of Stella Duff's recommendations on West Virginia. Waugh wanted to do a subject featuring the abolitionist John Brown, and she wrote back that this was not a good choice, that although John Brown attacked the armory in Harper's Ferry, West Virginia, he was not a West Virginian, and his cause was not supported by West Virginians, so that abolition was an odd subject in that respect. But Waugh was determined. I think it's interesting that he very much wanted to have this subject, and it's in a sense so kind of it does introduce some of the history of the United States that is, in a sense, not as glorious as much of the rest of the series presents. And I think in that way he addresses some of the dark shadows of American history. And he was so determined that that Stella Duff did present him with notes that he could use in doing the design. And in that respect, when Sidney Waugh wrote his text to go along with the vase, he wrote that the Institute of American History and Culture said that John Brown's raid was the most positive blow struck by anti-slavery forces in the 50 years of agitation for abolition. So he quoted them as kind of a justification for doing the design of West Virginia. And that was not the first or the last disagreement that would come up between the Institute and the Steuben representatives. Although the director of the Institute had liked the New Hampshire design, that was not true all over. The Institute had a council that was advisors from the academic world on various aspects of the Institute's functioning. And at one of the meetings, they saw designs from the Steuben project, and one of the council members became very agitated about several of the designs and felt that they were not appropriate, one of which was the New Hampshire design. And I can only assume that it was because it was fictional, not truly history, that he objected so much. This councilor member's name was Samuel Eliot Morrison, and he was a Harvard professor, a scholar of maritime history. He was a winner of important historical analysis prizes, and his opinion was valued, but he almost derailed the project. So one of the ways that they placated Morrison was to ask him for input on additional subjects. And for Massachusetts, he was a professor at Harvard. He suggested clipper ships, and then also for second choice, a scene from Harvard. And so for the state of Massachusetts, then Waugh did a beautiful design of a clipper ship built in Massachusetts, and talked about the importance of these ships in transportation and in history. And I think that Morrison continued to have an influence on Steuben, because about 9 years later, not part of the United States and crystal, but the vase on the right is the Puritan vase that Sidney Waugh did about 1959. And he presents a subject of Massachusetts history, the Puritans who settled in the colony in Massachusetts. And the inscription on this vase is from writing an address by Samuel Eliot Morrison, the one who objected so vehemently to the New Hampshire Bold. And I wonder if this was, again, another one of the subjects suggested for the state of Massachusetts that Morrison put aside and then later revived for another project, this simple vase with the one subject. The Puritan vase was acquired by the Stark Foundation for the museum's collection, and from another private collector who purchased it in the 60s. And this is the only one of those vases ever produced. You know, many of the Steuben pieces were conceived as editions of multiple numbers. And I wonder if this was almost literally a one-time project. The project continued, and amazingly enough, Stella Duff did come up with a suggestion for Iowa, an emphasis on the agriculture of Iowa, which is a very fitting subject for that state, and then Waugh came up with a beautiful abstracted design of agricultural products from Iowa. There were occasional slips along the way. The South Dakota vase has been one that has raised questions from viewers, and looking at it, you might think that the inscription would be the first thing that the people would question today. South Dakota as the Sunshine State. That surprises many because Florida is often thought of as a sunshine state, but that's actually a motto for the state. The wording was originally was on a version of the state flag previously. The wording has been removed, but there's still a sun element to it. So South Dakota is proud of the effects of sunlight across its plains. But the scene that was chosen for South Dakota emphasizes its geologic formations. The South Dakota scene features an element of Devil's Tower, which unfortunately is in Wyoming, and I'm not sure why they included Devil's Tower in the South Dakota scene. We had a visitor who was quite put out by this, but it will need to remain because we can't change the vase. I think you can perhaps see Devil's Tower from South Dakota, or at least you get there from it. The project expanded with 2 additional states in 1959, Alaska with the beautiful totem pole design, and Puerto Rico, or Hawaii was done, but to save possibilities, Puerto Rico was added. So we have a 51st vase waiting if Puerto Rico ever becomes a state. In addition to Sidney Waugh, Bruce Moore was another sculptor of the time who did a style very similar to Sidney Waugh's. It's very monumental, very Art Deco. However, as you see in the Wilderness trilogy, his figures are a little more active, a little smaller in scale, and he often did this lovely composition of in vertical designs using swirling lines. In this case, the glass element was designed by one of the design artists on the Steuben staff, George Thompson, designed how the trilogy would come together, and then Bruce Moore did the engraving design. And Moore also did a similar composition for a glass design by Donald Pollard of 4 presidential plaques, each with a representation of an important American president in a characteristic pose. George Washington kneeling, Thomas Jefferson sitting as a rider, Abraham Lincoln standing in strength, and finally Theodore Roosevelt at a podium, his bully pulpit, and each with a quotation of something from a speech or a story, each emphasizing the glories of American political and national history. And it's these works from Steuben that made their products important as examples of state gifts. Presidents and other representatives of the United States would choose examples of Steuben glass to give to leaders of other nations because the objects represented the craftsmanship of America and its quality, and it's and usually in works such as these, the national story that America brought to the world of justice and democracy and ideals of benevolence that the United States wanted to present to the rest of the world. And in this way, Houghton and his people had transformed Steuben glass into a new type of art that presented ideals as well as created a sense of luxury and status that made them appropriate and made the company for many years successful. And in this way, they can present ideals for all of us, for encouraging all that is greatest in us in aiming for excellence and quality. Thank you.